The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the kitchen tiles, like my marriage should have months ago. Julia didn't even look up from her phone as she packed her overnight bag with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. "Don't look at me like that, Mark," she said, her voice carrying that familiar edge of contempt. "You know I prefer men who are stronger than you, in every way." I stood there in our suburban Maine kitchen, watching my wife of 12 years fold lingerie I'd never seen her wear for me. The morning light streaming through our bay window made everything look deceptively peaceful. The kind of scene you'd find on a real estate brochure advertising the American dream. "Work retreat, right?" I asked, crouching to collect the ceramic shards. "With Alan." Julia's fingers paused on her phone screen for just a moment. Alan Ryder, senior partner at Morrison & Associates, her boss, her mentor, her everything I apparently wasn't. The man who'd been calling our house at odd hours, sending Julia on mysterious weekend conferences, and somehow inspiring her to buy new clothes every week. "That's right," she said, zipping her bag with unnecessary force. "The firm is expanding the paralegal program. Alan thinks I have real potential. I'm sure he does." Alan Ryder, with his silver hair and his corner office and his BMW that cost more than my annual salary as the firm's IT manager. The same firm where I'd worked for 8 years, invisible to everyone except when the servers crashed or someone forgot their password. "When will you be back?" I asked, dumping the broken pieces into the trash. "Sunday evening, maybe Monday morning." She finally looked at me, her green eyes cold as January in Bangor. "Try not to burn the house down while I'm gone." I watched her load her bag into her Honda Civic, the same car I'd surprised her with last Christmas. She'd complained it wasn't luxury enough, not like the cars Alan's wife drove. Sophie Ryder, elegant and untouchable, married to the man who was apparently everything I wasn't. As Julia's taillights disappeared down Maple Street, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I'd been carrying around for weeks. Sophie Ryder had given it to me at the firm's holiday party, a moment of shared understanding when we'd both watched our spouses gravitate toward each other like magnets. The phone rang twice before her cultured voice answered. "Mark, I was wondering when you'd call." "We need to talk," I said. "About our spouses. Don't worry, I'm not calling to confess love." Her laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Good, because I have some very interesting photos to show you." After we arranged to meet at Murphy's Bar downtown, I walked back into my empty house and opened my laptop. Being the IT manager had its advantages. I knew every digital footprint, every login, every supposedly deleted file. Julia thought she was clever, but I'd been watching, learning, preparing. The GPS tracker I'd installed in her car as a safety feature showed her current location. Not the Ocean View Hotel where the retreat was supposedly happening. Not even close. She was at 47 Birch Lane, Alan Ryder's address. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time in months. "She thinks she's clever," I said to the empty room. "I'm cleverer." Murphy's Bar smelled like stale beer and broken dreams, exactly the kind of place where conspiracies were born. Sophie Ryder sat in a corner booth, looking as out of place as a diamond in a coal mine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her clothes expensive but understated. She sipped white wine while I nursed a beer that tasted like regret. "Show me," I said. Sophie slid a manila envelope across the scarred wooden table. Inside were photographs, high-quality prints that made my stomach clench. Julia and Alan at restaurants I couldn't afford, walking hand in hand through Portland's Old Port, kissing in the parking garage beneath our office building. "Professional photographer?" I asked. "Private investigator. I've been suspicious for months." Sophie's voice was steady, but I caught the tremor underneath. "Alan thinks he's untouchable. Senior partner, pillar of the community, married to the perfect wife who looks the other way. Except you're not looking the other way. Neither are you, apparently." She gestured to my phone, where Julia's location still showed her at Alan's house. "GPS tracker?" "Among other things." I took a long drink of beer. "I manage all the firm's IT systems, email servers, security cameras, backup drives. Amazing what people think gets deleted permanently." Sophie's smile was predatory. "What do you have in mind?" Over the next hour, we laid out our plan like generals preparing for war. Sophie would handle Alan's personal life, his social circle, his reputation, his standing in the community. I would focus on Julia and the professional consequences. We'd coordinate our attacks, maximize the damage, ensure neither of our cheating spouses could recover. "There's something else," Sophie said, as we prepared to leave. Alan's been embezzling from client accounts. Small amounts, but consistent. I found the records in his home office. Can you prove it? With the right computer expert, yes. I smiled. Leave that to me. The next morning, I arrived at Morrison & Associates early, using my master key to access Alan's office. The security cameras were mysteriously offline, a technical glitch I'd arranged to fix later. Rob Mann, my best friend since high school, and the most reliable mechanic in 3 counties, had taught me a few things about surveillance equipment over the years. Installing the tiny camera behind Alan's law books took less than 5 minutes. The device was smaller than a thumb drive, wireless, and virtually undetectable. It would stream directly to a secure server I'd set up, recording everything. Back in my office, I began the delicate work of accessing Julia's email account. Not hacking, that would be illegal and traceable. But as her husband, I knew her passwords, her security questions, her digital habits. She'd been careless, using the same credentials for personal and work accounts. The emails were worse than I'd imagined. Months of correspondence, planning meetings, sharing intimate details about our marriage. Julia had been feeding Alan information about my job performance, my salary, my insecurities. They'd been laughing at me for half a year, but they'd also been sloppy, discussing times when Alan would be away from his wife, mentioning specific hotels, even sharing photos that would destroy both their careers if they became public. I forwarded everything to a secure backup drive and began planning phase 2. Hannah Corrigan worked 3 desks away from Julia, a perpetually gossipy woman who treated the office rumor mill like her personal kingdom. She'd always resented Julia's rapid advancement, her special treatment from management, her designer clothes, and expensive lunches. "Hannah," I said, approaching her desk with a concerned expression, "can I ask you something confidentially?" Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Of course, Mark. What's wrong?" "I'm worried about Julia. She's been acting strange lately, staying out late, getting mysterious phone calls. I found some things on our home computer." I let my voice trail off, looking appropriately devastated. "What kind of things?" I pulled out my phone, showing her one of the tamer photos Sophie had shared. Julia and Alan at dinner, clearly intimate but not explicitly romantic. "I don't know what to think." Hannah's gasp was audible. "Oh my God, Mark, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "Please don't say anything yet. I'm still trying to figure out what to do." But I knew Hannah couldn't keep a secret if her life depended on it. By lunch, half the office would know something was happening between Julia and Alan. By evening, it would be common knowledge. Phase 3 required Rob's help. My best friend had been suspicious of Julia from the beginning, claiming she thought she was too good for our small Maine town. He owned Mann's Classic Cars, a garage specializing in vintage restoration, and he knew more about automotive systems than most engineers. "You want me to do what?" Rob asked, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. "Disable her car. Nothing permanent, nothing dangerous. Just enough to strand her somewhere embarrassing." Rob grinned. "I can work with that. When?" "Tonight. She's at Alan's house. If her car won't start when she tries to leave, she'll have to call someone for help, and you'll be monitoring her phone." "Exactly." That evening, while Julia and Alan were presumably enjoying their romantic dinner, Rob and I drove to Birch Lane. Alan's neighborhood was the kind of place where houses had names instead of numbers, where the driveways were longer than most people's streets. His BMW sat in the circular drive next to Julia's Honda. Rob worked quickly, removing a spark plug and disconnecting a battery cable. "She'll turn the key and get nothing," he explained. "No permanent damage, but she'll need a tow." I placed a small recording device under her dashboard, another gift from my IT toolkit. If Julia called Alan for help, I'd have every word. We were back at Rob's garage within an hour, drinking beer and waiting for the show to begin. My phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Julia's GPS tracker showed her car hadn't moved, but her phone was active. The recording device transmitted clearly. "Alan, my car won't start. I'm stuck in your driveway. No, I can't call Mark. What if he asks questions?" "Well, what do you suggest?" "Fine, call me a cab, but this is humiliating." Rob raised his beer bottle in a toast. "Phase 1 complete." "Phase 1, I agreed. She hasn't seen humiliating yet." Julia returned home the next morning, with the expression of someone who'd spent the night in a cheap motel instead of her lover's mansion. Her designer retreat outfit was wrinkled, her makeup smeared, her confidence shaken. "Car trouble." I asked innocently, not looking up from my breakfast. Battery issue. Had to get a tow. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Probably your fault somehow. When's the last time you had it serviced? Last month, actually. I have the receipt. I slid the maintenance record across the table. Funny how these things happen at the worst possible times. She stared at the paperwork, her green eyes narrowing. You're enjoying this. Enjoying what? My wife having car trouble. That would make me a terrible husband. Don't play innocent, Mark. I know you better than that. But she didn't know me at all. That was becoming increasingly clear. Over the next few days, I watched Julia's world begin to crack. Hannah's gossip network had done its work. Whispered conversations stopped when Julia entered rooms. Colleagues avoided eye contact. Even the receptionist seemed cooler than usual. Alan, meanwhile, was dealing with his own problems. The photos Sophie had strategically leaked to his golf club were creating uncomfortable questions. His wife's sudden interest in their financial records was making him nervous. The mysterious technical difficulties with his office computer were slowing his work. I'd been careful with the sabotage, nothing traceable or obviously malicious. Files that took longer to load, emails that occasionally failed to send, calendar appointments that mysteriously rescheduled themselves, death by 1,000 digital cuts. But Julia wasn't stupid. She'd survived in the legal world by being observant, calculating, ruthless when necessary. By Thursday, she was watching me with the intensity of a prosecutor studying a hostile witness. We need to talk, she said that evening, cornering me in my home office. About what? About whatever game you think you're playing. She sat down across from my desk, her posture aggressive. I know you've been snooping, going through my things, checking my phone, probably tracking my movements. I leaned back in my chair, meeting her stare. That's quite an accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. She pulled out her phone, showing me a screenshot of our bank account. You've been monitoring our finances too. Every purchase, every transaction. It's our joint account. I have every right to see where our money goes. Our money? Her laugh was bitter. I make more than you do, Mark. I always have. This house, this lifestyle, it's built on my success, not yours. There it was, the contempt she'd been hiding for years, finally out in the open. Julia had always been ambitious, but somewhere along the way, ambition had curdled into arrogance. She'd started believing her own press releases, thinking she was better than the small-town life we'd built together. You're right, I said calmly. You do make more money. You are more successful, but success isn't everything, says the man who's never achieved anything significant in his life. The words hit like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. Is that what Alan tells you? That I'm insignificant? Her face flushed red. Leave Alan out of this. Hard to do when he's apparently so involved in our marriage. Julia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I want you out of this house, tonight. It's my house too. My name is on the deed. Then I'll leave. I'll stay with... She caught herself before saying Alan's name. I'll stay with Hannah until we can figure this out. Good luck with that, I said. Hannah's been asking a lot of questions about you lately. Seems she's heard some interesting rumors. The color drained from Julia's face. She'd underestimated Hannah's capacity for gossip and overestimated her own ability to control the narrative. In a town like ours, reputation was currency, and Julia's account was rapidly approaching bankruptcy. What do you want? She asked finally. I want the truth, about Alan, about how long this has been going on, about what you really think of our marriage. Julia was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. When she spoke, her voice was softer but no less cutting. You want the truth? Fine. Alan makes me feel alive in ways you never could. He's powerful, successful, going places. When I'm with him, I remember who I used to be before I settled for this mediocre life. Mediocre, I repeated. Yes, mediocre. This house, this town, this marriage, it's all so small, Mark. I want more than small. I nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Well, then you should have more. You should have everything you deserve. Something in my tone made her step back. What does that mean? It means you haven't seen anything yet, darling. You want to play in the big leagues? Let's see how you handle the competition. That night, after Julia had stormed out to stay at Hannah's house, I made a series of phone calls. The first was to Sophie, updating her on Julia's confession and our accelerated timeline. The second was to Rob, asking him to meet me at the office early tomorrow morning. The third call was to a number I'd found in Alan's contact list, a reporter from the Portland Press-Herald, who specialized in legal scandals. "This is Mark Garvey from Morrison and Associates," I said when she answered. "I have information about some irregularities in our client accounts that might interest you." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that involve senior partners and missing money." "Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began preparing the evidence. Bank records, email chains, security footage from the office cameras, everything needed to paint a picture of corruption and betrayal. Julia wanted to play in the big leagues. She was about to learn that in the big leagues, the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. The Morrison and Associates parking garage at 6 a.m. was a tomb of concrete and shadows. Rob waited by his pickup truck, coffee steaming in the frigid Maine air, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Remind me why we're doing this before sunrise," he asked. "Because Alan gets here early on Fridays, and because the security guard doesn't start his shift until 7. I handed him a cup of coffee and a small device that looked like a USB drive. "All you have to do is plug this into his computer. It'll copy everything automatically. And if we get caught, we won't. Alan's in court until noon, and Julia's suspension means she won't be here at all." Julia's suspension had been Sophie's masterstroke. A carefully orchestrated complaint to the State Bar Association about improper client relationships had triggered an immediate investigation. Julia was barred from the office pending review, a humiliation that had sent shockwaves through the local legal community. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor, my master key granting access to Alan's corner office. The morning light streaming through his windows illuminated diplomas, awards, and photographs of a man who'd built his life on the appearance of integrity. Rob worked quickly, connecting the device to Alan's computer while I kept watch. The copying process took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. "Got it," Rob said, pocketing the drive. "Now what?" "Now we wait for the fireworks." The fireworks began at 2:47 p.m., when Alan returned from court to find 2 FBI agents waiting in his office. Sophie had been thorough in her evidence gathering, bank records showing systematic embezzlement, email chains discussing client confidentiality violations, and security footage of Alan accessing files he had no business reviewing. I watched from my office as they escorted him past my door, his face ashen, his expensive suit looking suddenly shabby. The great Alan Ryder, reduced to a common criminal in handcuffs. But Alan wasn't finished. Desperate men do desperate things, and Alan Ryder was nothing if not desperate. He made bail that evening and immediately began his counterattack. If he was going down, he'd take everyone with him, starting with the IT manager, who'd had access to all the systems he'd supposedly compromised. My phone rang at 8 p.m. Alan's voice was raw with fury and fear. "You think you're clever, don't you, Garvey? Planting evidence, manipulating files, playing puppet master from your little office. I have no idea what you're talking about. We both know that's a lie, but here's what you don't know. I have insurance. Photos of you and my wife together. Bank records showing payments from her personal account to yours. Evidence of a conspiracy to frame me." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Maine winter. "Sophie and I never what? Never met? Never planned this together? I have surveillance footage from Murphy's bar, Mark. You and Sophie, thick as thieves, planning my destruction." The line went quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. Alan was cornered, but cornered animals were the most dangerous. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to back off. Call off your wife. Call off the investigation. Make this all go away, or I'll destroy both of you. And if I refuse, then you'll learn what real power looks like." He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in the darkness of my empty house. Julia was still staying with Hannah, the two of them no doubt plotting their own revenge. Alan was facing federal charges, but still had enough connections to make my life miserable. Sophie was playing her own game, and I wasn't entirely sure whose side she was really on. For the first time since this began, I felt the weight of what I'd started. But it was too late to stop now. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Hannah Corrigan had been found in her apartment, unconscious from what appeared to be a prescription drug overdose. She was alive but hospitalized, and the police were treating it as a possible suicide attempt. Julia called me from the hospital, her voice shaking. "Hannah tried to hurt herself, Mark. She left a note saying she couldn't handle the guilt anymore." "Guilt about what?" "About feeding you information. About helping you destroy people's lives. She said you manipulated her, used her jealousy against me to spread lies and rumors." I closed my eyes, feeling the walls closing in. Hannah's breakdown was an unexpected complication, one that painted me as the villain in a story I'd thought I was controlling. "Where are you now?" I asked. "At the hospital. But I'm coming home tonight. We need to talk." "Julia, don't. Just don't. I know what you've done, Mark. All of it. And now I'm going to show you what real strength looks like." She hung up, leaving me alone with the consequences of my actions and the growing realization that I'd underestimated everyone involved. That evening, I sat in my living room waiting for Julia to come home, knowing that everything was about to change. The GPS tracker showed her car approaching, but for the first time in months, I wasn't sure I wanted to know where my wife was going. The front door opened at exactly 9 p.m. Julia walked in, followed by two people I hadn't expected: Sophie Ryder and a man I didn't recognize, tall and professional-looking with the bearing of law enforcement. "Hello, Mark," Sophie said, her cultured voice carrying a note of triumph. "I'd like you to meet Detective Williams from the state police. We've been having a very interesting conversation about conspiracy, harassment, and obstruction of justice." I looked at Julia, searching her face for any sign of the woman I'd married. What I found was a stranger wearing my wife's features, her green eyes cold as winter ice. "You wanted to see real strength," she said. "Congratulations, you're about to get your wish." The detective was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd heard every lie and excuse in the book. He sat across from me at my own kitchen table, a digital recorder between us like a small black judge. "Let's start simple," Detective Williams said. "How long have you been monitoring your wife's activities without her consent?" Julia sat beside Sophie on my living room couch, the two of them presenting a united front that would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. My wife and my co-conspirator, now allied against me. "I installed a GPS tracker in my wife's car for safety reasons," I said carefully. "It's not illegal for a husband to know where his wife is." "What about the surveillance equipment in Mr. Ryder's office?" I felt my chest tighten. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sophie leaned forward, her expression sympathetic in the way that predators look sympathetic right before they strike. "Mark, we found the camera. We found the recording equipment. We have evidence of you accessing confidential files, manipulating email systems, and coordinating with me to frame Alan for crimes he didn't commit." "Crimes he didn't commit?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You showed me the evidence, the embezzlement, the client account irregularities." "Fabricated," Julia said quietly. "Sophie's been planning this for months, Mark. She needed someone to blame for Alan's legitimate business practices, someone expendable, someone like you." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I looked at Sophie, searching for some sign that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding. What I found was the cold satisfaction of someone whose plan had worked perfectly. "You used me," I said. "You used yourself," Sophie replied. "I simply provided the opportunity. A jealous husband, a failing marriage, a man desperate to prove he was stronger than he appeared. You wrote this story, Mark. I just helped you perform it." Detective Williams consulted his notes. "Mrs. Ryder has provided us with extensive documentation of your conspiracy. Recorded phone calls, email exchanges, financial records showing payments for surveillance equipment. She's been cooperating with law enforcement for weeks." "Cooperating," I repeated numbly. "Alan suspected something was wrong when the FBI investigation began," Julia explained. "The evidence was too convenient, too perfectly timed. Sophie came to him with the truth, that she'd been manipulating you, gathering evidence of your stalking and harassment, building a case that would clear his name and destroy yours." I felt like I was drowning in my own living room, the familiar walls closing in around me. "The photos you showed me, Julia and Alan together, digitally altered," Sophie said. "Quite sophisticated work, actually. Alan and I hired a professional, someone who specializes in creating evidence for divorce proceedings. Amazing what you can do with modern technology." But I saw them together. I tracked Julia's car to Alan's house. Julia's laugh was bitter. "You tracked my car to the address I programmed into the GPS system." "I was never at Alan's house, Mark. I was at the Ocean View Hotel, exactly where I said I'd be, working on a legitimate case that Alan assigned to me." The detective closed his notebook and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Garvey, you're under arrest for stalking, harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." The words faded into background noise as the handcuffs clicked around my wrists. I looked at Julia one last time, searching for any trace of the woman I'd thought I knew. "Why?" I asked. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with the practiced gesture of someone preparing to leave a crime scene. Because you were right about one thing, Mark. I do prefer stronger men. Men who don't crumble the moment they're challenged. Men who don't destroy everything they touch out of petty jealousy. I never destroyed anything. I was trying to save our marriage. Our marriage was over the moment you decided I was the enemy instead of your partner. The moment you chose revenge over trust, manipulation over communication. You did this to yourself. As Detective Williams led me toward the front door, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The man staring back at me looked older, smaller, diminished, not stronger at all. "One more thing," Sophie called out as we reached the door. "Alan and I are getting divorced, amicably, with a very generous settlement for both parties. He's retiring from the firm, and I'm moving to California. Clean slate for everyone. Everyone except me." "Everyone except you," she agreed. "But then again, you were never really part of the equation, were you? You were just the tool we needed to make it all work." The police car was warm compared to the February night, but I couldn't stop shivering. As we pulled away from my former house, I saw Julia and Sophie through the living room window, already deep in conversation about whatever came next. I'd wanted to prove I was stronger than Alan Ryder, stronger than the successful men who seemed to effortlessly claim everything I thought I deserved. Instead, I'd proven that I was exactly as weak as I'd always feared. Weak enough to be manipulated. Weak enough to destroy my own life. Weak enough to mistake revenge for strength. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to become the stronger man, I'd become the weakest man of all. 6 months later, I sat in a different kitchen in a different town, reading about Alan Ryder's appointment to the State Judicial Commission. The newspaper photo showed him shaking hands with the governor, Sophie beside him in an elegant dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My lawyer had managed to negotiate a plea deal, 2 years probation, community service, and a restraining order that kept me at least 500 yards away from Julia, Alan, or Sophie. The IT job was gone, of course, along with my house, my savings, and most of my dignity. Rob visited when he could, driving the hour and a half from our hometown to the small apartment I'd rented in Augusta. He never said, "I told you so," but I could see it in his eyes every time he looked at me. "Julia's engaged," he mentioned during one visit, trying to sound casual. "To Alan? Nah, some lawyer from Boston. Big firm, big money, big everything. Wedding's supposed to be in the fall." I nodded, stirring sugar into coffee that tasted like cardboard. "Good for her. You mean that?" I considered the question seriously. Did I mean it? Was I genuinely happy that Julia had found someone who could give her the life she'd always wanted? Or was I just too exhausted to feel anything more? "I think I do," I said finally. She was right about one thing. Our marriage was over long before any of this started. I just wasn't ready to admit it. Rob leaned back in his chair, studying me with the frank assessment of someone who'd known me since we were kids. "You look different. Older, smaller maybe, but not in a bad way. More like you've stopped trying to be something you're not." That evening, after Rob left, I walked to the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Julia and her fiancé at some charity gala, both of them smiling for the camera with the practiced ease of people who belonged in that world. On the back, someone had written, "Some people get what they deserve. Others get what they need." I recognized Sophie's handwriting. I studied the photo for a long time, looking for some trace of the woman I'd married, the woman I'd thought I was fighting for. What I found was a stranger in an expensive dress, playing a role in someone else's story. Maybe that's what strength really was. Not the ability to control others, but the wisdom to know when to let go. Not the power to destroy, but the courage to walk away from destruction. I tore up the photograph and threw the pieces in the trash, then sat down at my computer to write a letter I'd been putting off for months. "Dear Hannah," I began. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to apologize. It took me 3 hours to write 2 pages, but when I finished, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not stronger, I'd learned to be suspicious of that word, but cleaner, somehow. Like I'd finally stopped carrying weight that had never been mine to bear." The next morning, I started looking for a new job. Not in IT, that bridge was thoroughly burned, but something simpler, something that didn't require me to be anyone other than who I actually was. I found work at a small bookstore downtown, shelving inventory and helping customers find what they were looking for. The pay was terrible, but the work was honest. and my boss didn't care about my past as long as I showed up on time and did my job. 3 weeks into the new position, a familiar face walked through the door. Hannah Corrigan looked older, thinner, but her eyes were clearer than I remembered. "Hello, Mark," she said quietly. "Hannah, how are you?" "Better. Therapy helps. So does distance from all that drama." She browsed the fiction section while we talked, her fingers trailing over book spines, like she was reading Braille. "I got your letter. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. I didn't at first. But my therapist said forgiveness is more about letting go than about excusing what happened. So I'm trying to let go." Why, we talked for 20 minutes about books, about healing, about the strange ways life redirects itself when you're not paying attention. When she left, she bought a copy of a memoir about second chances and wished me luck. That night, I called Rob and told him about the encounter. "Sounds like you're both doing better," he said. "We're both doing different. I'm not sure better is the right word yet. Different's a start." 6 months after that, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Julia Garvey was becoming Julia Morrison, marrying her Boston lawyer in a ceremony that would undoubtedly be featured in the society pages. I threw the invitation away without opening it, then retrieved it from the trash an hour later. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mark, I know this might seem strange, but I wanted you to know that I don't hate you. What happened between us was complicated, and we both made choices we regret. I hope you're finding peace. Jay." I read the note 3 times, looking for hidden meanings or subtle cruelties. What I found was something I hadn't expected: genuine kindness from someone who had every reason to despise me. That weekend, I drove back to our old town for the first time since my arrest. The house on Maple Street had new owners, a young couple with small children who'd painted the shutters blue and planted flowers in the garden Julia had never bothered to maintain. I parked across the street and sat in my car for an hour, remembering the life I'd built and destroyed in that house. Not all the memories were bad. There had been good years, happy moments, times when Julia and I had genuinely loved each other. Those memories felt like artifacts from someone else's life, but they were mine to carry. The good with the bad, the joy with the regret, the strength with the weakness. As I drove home to Augusta, I realized that revenge had been delivered after all. Not the dramatic, satisfying destruction I'd planned, but something quieter and more complete. I'd gotten exactly what I deserved, the chance to learn who I really was when everything else was stripped away. It wasn't